Hi guys. So today's episode, we have my cat here joining us. If you're watching this on video, but we're going to be talking about fashion and music subcultures. So I've always been interested about subcultures, especially how different music genres create different subcultures with their own fashion taste. For example, let's talk about punk and rock and roll, okay? Punk and rock and roll is often associated with rebellion, anti establishment, and they usually wear like ripped clothes, leather, studs, pins, basically everything outside of the norm. And because they don't want to conform, they don't want to look like every other person, they don't agree with what every other person agrees on, or um, that they are law abiding people. They don't want to go by the law. They don't want to do how they don't want to act how other people act. They want to be different. So they dress differently and they sound differently. So they use fashion and their sound to express how they feel politically. And just like how their clothes is like rebellious, their sound is too. So it's often like high energy, fast tempo, anti establishment lyrics, and it's a very DIY kind of movement. And they also do a lot of DIY with how they dress. And one of my favorite punk rock and roll artists is Patti Smith. Patti Smith really embodies rock and roll and punk, and she also DIYs her own genre because she mixed poetry in that. And how she dresses and looks is also not conforming with society, and she has a very distinct look that is only to her, even though she doesn't look like how other punk or rock and roll artists looks, but still it is very like unique and different to her. So fashion and music has always been in conversation with one another. What we wear is often how we sound, how we move, and how we belong. In a way, music creates our uniform and it signals to other people or like minded people that we have things in common and we belong to this specific group. And this kind of gives people, especially the youth, a visual identity before they even need to speak. So, talking about punk rock and rebellion, every generation has their own kind of active rebellion. So let's talk about Elvis Presley. Going back to the 50s, Elvis Presley didn't look like how the rebels in the 70s look. So the rebels in the 70s had like fishnet, spiky hair, studs, but Elvis Presley did not look like that, but he was still considered a rebel. But because in the 50s, what Elvis Presley was doing was rebellious. How he used to move, how he used to dance, how he used to talk and talk to girls, and even like his music wasn't like the normal kind of music that other people were making. Um, and he created his own kind of rebellious outfits, like the leather jacket, tight pants, the costume, the hair. This for them wasn't like what the quote unquote young respectable gentleman is supposed to wear at the time. And we see this in movies like Grease, Rebel Without a Cause. James Dean was wearing his iconic red jacket, the t shirt, the denim jeans. Also, Marlon Brando in the film Wild Ones. They all look so iconic. And at the time in fashion history, they are considered the rebels. Like how that's how we study them. Sorry, that's how we study them. We call them the rebels. But even if you compare them, like the rebels of the 50s and the rebels of the 70s, like the rebels of the 50s look way more decent looking and decent dressed than the rebels in the 70s. But that's the thing, every generation has their own kind of rebel and their own kind of sound. Because like if you compare punk and rock in the 70s, it was very heavy, and even in the like it was very heavy and like it was rough. Not everyone, like it wasn't digestible to everyone. But if you compare that to like Elvis Presley and his music, much more digestible. But at the time it was different and new and rebellious. So now let's move forward to hip hop. So in the late 70s and 80s, hip hop emerged from black and Latino communities in New York. And just like how their music was all about like flashiness, looking cool, who's the most fly, they dressed the same too. So even in like in their music, if you listen, like they talk a lot about like the bling and like how cool they are and how rich they are, and it's just flaunting their wealth. And if you look at them, like how they dress is also, it translates to the same thing. So their music was all about like visibility and status, and so was their music. In fashion, there was a lot of like, in their fashion, there was a lot of like monograms, like the LV head to toe, the Gucci head to toe, a lot of bling, oversized silhouettes, gold chains, sneakers, tracksuits. It was just too much. Everything was just too much, too extra. Also brands like Nike, like Adidas, it was very like a part of their culture, not just as a logo but also as a symbol of success and self-worth. So if you wear that, like um even if it was fake, even if it wasn't like real LV or a real Gucci, you still look fly. Also Dapper Dan, like he was one of the most important influential fashion icons um in history, because he literally took what it was obviously like, it was a lawsuit, but whatever, like it was obviously illegal, but he took these brands, these high-end brands like LV and Gucci and whatever, and he literally took their logo and created his own clothing, and a lot of people were wearing them. A lot of artists were wearing them in hip hop and rap, R&B, because for them it's a sign of self-worth. Even if it wasn't real, even if it wasn't like, it was fake clothes, at the end of the day they still felt like it communicated something. And that just shows you how the importance of fashion is in music, because they felt like if they weren't wearing this type of clothes, they weren't gonna be looked at as like one of the greats or someone who actually made it. So hip hop transformed streetwear into a global fashion force. So there's this guy, he's called Paul Bloomberg, sorry. He created the innovative fashion theory in the 70s, which is basically a model that explains the trickle up and trickle down fashion model. So the trickle up is basically when you take streetwear, something that happens from the streets, like from the down below, you take these fashion items and it goes up the fashion system or the fashion ladder to the luxury brands. And then trickle down is the opposite effect, is when you take couture, or you take it's, for example, Zara, you take things from the runway and you make it fast fashion. So what I'm gonna be talking about today is the trickle up effect, which is basically where, again, style originated from the streets or lower income groups, and it moves forward up the fashion ladder, or it trickles up, and becomes, it influences high fashion designers. So for example, denim was used by low income groups because of how sturdy the material is. So you can wear it on and on and on and again, and the material took so long to rip. That's why a lot of people who don't have money just buy one pair of denim jeans or something, and it would stay with them for a long time. But the rich people didn't really need to wear denim, because for them, they didn't have trouble like buying clothes over and over again, because they had the money for it. But with the rise of hip hop, and because hip hop didn't come from a rich community, they were wearing denim a lot, and that trickled up to like the fashion ladder, as we say, and the rich people started being interested in denim, and that's how denim started becoming this mainstream thing that everyone is wearing. So for example, the brand Off-White by Virgil Abloh is like the literal prime example of the trickle up effect, because it's mainly like streetwear but sold within a luxury market. And what Virgil Abloh and his brand associated with, what is he associated with? Hip hop. So basically, it's all connected, music and fashion. And he made luxury basically accessible for artists like A$AP Rocky, Kid Cudi, Travis Scott, and many, many, many other artists. He was also the artistic director for LV's menswear line. And after he passed, who took over? Pharrell Williams. And what is Pharrell Williams known for? He's obviously an artist who does hip hop and pop and R&B. So literally, we just keep going back and forth with music and fashion, and music and fashion, it literally goes hand in hand, and this is how you create subcultures. You literally mix fashion and music and you create a whole movement. Okay, now let's move on and talk about grunge. Grunge is probably one of my favorite genres. All in all, like in general, not just music, but like specifically in fashion because of how effortless it is. So grunge was introduced in the 90s, and the most perfect movie in my opinion to like explain grunge, if you want to know more about grunge, is Empire Records and Dazed and Confused. These movies really explain the attitude of grunge, not just the music or how they used to dress. No, like even their attitudes towards life, towards people, towards their relationships, towards themselves. They just literally did not care. Like that's it. They did not care. They wore whatever they felt. They had unbrushed hair, thrifted flannels, oversized knits, Doc Martens, and that all happened because in the 80s, it was just too much glam. Like in the 80s, everything was super extra. So they just wanted to move away from that and be less glam, less everything. They just wanted to like tone everything down. And that's why the genre grunge basically happened. And the origin of fashion styling is basically, it started from the 60s, from the hippie movement, because they didn't want to conform, and they were very political, and they were against what was happening in the world. So it was one of the biggest movements in the world, which is like the hippie movement. They didn't want to look like, again, like law abiding individuals, and they started mixing and matching, because like if you wear what everyone else is wearing, like quote unquote for them, like the normal people, you'd be wearing just like a shirt, like you'd be looking very elegant and very like put together, but they didn't want to be dressed like that, because to be dressed like that is basically to tell them whatever you're doing is okay. I'm gonna continue living life how you tell me to live life, but didn't want to do that. They wanted to visually show people that no, I don't agree. I want to do whatever I want. I'm gonna live life however I want. So that's why they started mixing and matching their clothes, wearing whatever they want. And I feel like that's how fashion styling started. They started mixing and matching different items, high and low brands. To be fair, at the time, like the hippie movement didn't really have high brands, but yeah, they used to mix and match a lot of things. And also, they were really into recycling, obviously. So they DIY'd a lot of outfits. They took patterns. They took fabric from everywhere, and they just created their own thing. But to relate it to grunge, for me, I feel like grunge is like the second wave of fashion styling, because after the 70s we had after the 60s we had the 70s also was very heavily like influenced by the 60s, which is the hippie movement and like the flair and fringe and all of that. And then we have the 80s. The 80s was a lot of pop of color, a lot of structure, very experimental in a weird way. Like so much glam, so much hair, so much makeup. So I think in the 90s, everything was much more minimalistic, and grunge felt like another wave of fashion styling, because they were like, you know what, I'll wear whatever I want again. I'll mix and match again. I don't care about what the magazines are telling me to wear. I don't care about what other people are telling me to wear. I'm gonna wear whatever I feel, and for them, that's a political statement on its own. And they really created cool distinct looks that were very unique. And talking about grunge music, it's very raw alternative rock, and it exploded in Seattle in the 90s. Their sound was like heavy guitar, quite loud dynamics, raw vocals. It blended a lot of punk, metal, indie rock, and the vibe was just depression, isolation, addiction. And if you see how they dressed, it literally was giving the same energy, like a person who just doesn't care about life anymore. They're just existing. And they literally embodied nonchalant, and they didn't act nonchalant because they thought it was cool and mysterious, but they literally just were nonchalant. They did not care enough, and it was actually not glamorized. It was actually the opposite. Like I think people from the outside world would glamorize it, but if you're actually grunge or living the grunge lifestyle, you were actually depressed. You were most probably an addict. So it was it was a weird kind of genre, I'd say. And obviously we can't talk about grunge without talking about Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, and Courtney Love. They were literally grunge royalty, and not and people loved them so much. Not only because they loved Nirvana, but because Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love literally embodied that grunge lifestyle. They embodied like the depressive like atmosphere and isolation. They were very scandalous, very rebellious, how they dressed. It influenced a lot of people, how they dressed and how they looked. And people who embodied the grunge life rejected how they were supposed to live life. And that kind of translated in their lyrics, in their sound, in their fashion. And because there was a lot of rejection to like what was happening in the world, they were also rejecting fashion in a way. So as you can like, if you see how they used to dress, it was a lot of muted tone, no structure, very bland, very boring. But that in on its own created a whole movement. And I personally think grunge really stood the test of time because grunge is very messy, it's very emotional, it's very human, and that's life, honestly. Like, life gets messy, life gets emotional, and at some point in life, I think we all kind of become grunge, even if we don't really know it. Like, I remember once when I was 15, I was I don't know if I was going through something, I don't even remember, but I was just over it. I was fed up with life, and I literally donated every single piece of clothing that had one hint of color. One hint of color. I used to just wear literally black, white, and gray. For some reason, like I did a strike or something on colors. And even if at the time I didn't know it, but that was very grunge of me. Like, grunge is kind of um is a emotion, I think, you enter. It's a world you enter, even if you don't feel like you're actually in it, or you don't even know what grunge is. It's a thing, I feel like, that really stood the test of time because it's very human. Like, out of all these kind of fashion and music genres that I'm talking about, for me grunge is the most thing that I feel like is the most relatable to a lot of people. Okay, let's talk about raves like techno, house, EDM. Such high energy music, very energetic beats. And what has the most energy? Color. That's why that's why in raves a lot of people wear so much neon. They paint their like faces and bodies with like glow in the dark neon colors, and that basically kind of reflects the music. So color gives you energy. You know how when you're sad, people say, you feel blue, or when you're sad, you wear muted colors, you wear black. If you're in love or you're feeling romantic, you wear red, you wear pink. If you're happy and you feel joyful, you wear yellow, you wear orange. So even in fashion psychology, like, if it's a known thing, like if you want to feel good, if you don't feel bad, if you feel bad, sorry, and you want to feel good, like they always say, wear a bright color and the energy will be transmitted to you emotionally and you will feel better. So basically, that's why I feel like in techno and house and EDM, like, these sounds are very playful and they're very different. They're very futuristic and they're super, super upbeat. So the fashion in return, if you look at how people dress in raves, it's very futuristic designs, bright colors, playful accessories. Even their makeup is very playful and so much color and so much, like, it literally looks futuristic, like out of this world. And it's a very overall euphoric experience. And it, like, how you, when you hear like EDM or techno, and when you see people who are in these festivals, how they dress, like, it just makes sense together. Like, it makes sense. And I was just at Seoul DXB, and I was basically observing the fashion, and I was wondering, like, why do we always wear the same things when we go to festivals over and over again? Like, common fashion items are like animal prints. I always see animal prints, cowboy boots, cowboy hats, fringe, shades. Everyone's just wearing shades, jersey, flannel, Timberlands, and so on. And no shade, by the way, to anyone. I was literally wearing like so much print and cowboy boots, and I was wearing shades, so no shade. But I'm just saying that, it's something that I always constantly see over and over again. I was wondering why. Like, why do we always gravitate to these items? Like how when you're gonna go to a festival, you automatically know the pieces of items you're gonna look at in your wardrobe, or the crazier piece of items that you don't usually wear. And I wanted to know, like, why do we always gravitate towards them? And I came to two conclusions. So the first one is, because you're going to a festival, you're not going to one concert. So festivals have different types of musics, a lot of genre, a lot of things going on, a lot of different sounds. And so there will be a lot of different people in these festivals, people who who love rock, or punk, or grunge, or hip hop, or whatever, or Afro. So it's like a lot of different people, and there's like just, it's a no judgment zone. People are gonna be dressed differently. Everyone's gonna come with their own style, with their own vibe. So no one's judging, and that's why I feel like we tend to wear the crazier fashion items we have, like the prints and cowboy hats and boots and whatever. And it's as if like the bright colors and the cool outfits that we're wearing are like a silent nod, or like a silent like celebration to honoring the festival and the community. It's like you're showing that you do care and you do belong and you do want to be part of this community. And then my second conclusion is, I realized that, going back to what I was mentioning before, in the 60s, how the 60s and 70s, how the 70s were basically celebrating the hippie lifestyle that started in the 60s, and how, as I mentioned, that fashion styling originated from the 60s, and it was emphasized in the 70s. And basically what happened in the late 60s, which is Woodstock Festival. Woodstock Festival was a music and art fair held in 1969. And that weekend basically literally transformed rock festivals into a cultural emblem. Like, it transformed everything. It was so iconic. It amplified music and fashion and politics in another level. And people who played in the festival, some of them was Jimi Hendrix and Santana and many, many, many iconic artists. Like, I can't even begin to explain what Woodstock Festival means to music and fashion. And I think because Woodstock was for the hippies, the hippies were all like uniting for a single movement, which is world peace. And the hippies were the ones who created fashion styling, because they, as I mentioned, they used to mix and match a lot of things together. So I think because of Woodstock Festival, because of the no judgment that happened there, because of the freedom that happened, because of how iconic that festival was, and how it gave people such a like the freedom to just exist, and it like kind of took them a bit away from what was happening in the world at the time. I think that kind of atmosphere and attitude that happened in that festival, we kind of took and implemented in every other festival that happened after. And I really think that's why, like, it affected, our attitudes to music and fashion in festivals. And that's why, like, I see a lot of similarities with how we dress now in fashion festivals, in music festivals, and how people how people used to wear clothes in Woodstock Festival, and also their attitudes and the overall vibe. But yeah, what is super cool for me is, it's like seeing these subcultures constantly recycled on runways and social media and trend forecasting. But the thing is, once upon a time, this wasn't just a trend, and it wasn't just like, oh, I want to dress grunge today, I want to dress all punk and rock today, I want to dress hip hop today. No, it was literally an actual political movement. It was showing class, it was showing your race, your identity, where you belong as a youth. It was such a it was a lot of different movements that I think now we just use as like trends, but at the time they were so real, and people used it as a coping mechanism to deal with whatever was happening in the world. But yeah, they're all not just like fashion pieces, but they're literally history, so much history. They literally carry sound and resistance and community. And basically, music gave people a voice, but fashion gave that voice a body. That's how I see it. But yeah, I'm done with my TED talk today. I hope you liked this episode. Please let me know if you have any comments, or if you found anything interesting, or if you have any information that I didn't mention before about, or observations or insights. Please comment. I'm very interested about reading more and understanding more about this topic, and maybe I gather more information and do a part two of this episode, because I feel like it's a very broad topic, and honestly, it doesn't, like, it keeps, you keep getting more information the more you read about this topic, because it has a lot of history, and it's still ongoing. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.